Good evening. Welcome to the Urban Fantasy Track at DragonCon and our author interview series. I am joined this evening by the dynamic duo and longtime track supporters. Susan Griffith and Clay Griffith are here this evening to answer a bunch of questions. If any of you who may be watching have any questions that you would like to ask at any point, if you're signed in via StreamYard, then you can do that and we will see them. So otherwise, we will see those, any comments that you have will show up later. Feel free to do that as well. Now, my first question for both of you is, did you read fantasy and sci-fi as children and young adults? And Susan, what about you? Did you?
Always. Yeah, I was a huge fantasy and science fiction person. I read a lot. I've read everything. I remember going as a small child and I went through like everything in the children's section by the time I was 5 or 6. And then I had to scrounge for other work. And so I was constantly, looking for those great stories. So once I found, and I read everything like mysteries and histories and romance and Westerns, it didn't make a difference what it was. I was reading it. But once I found science fiction and fantasy, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and all those, that just started me on the path. And then I basically absorbed everything that I could possibly find, and begged my mother for books. And,
right.
In those days, you only got the one book once in the blue moon. And so I was very, very selective over what I needed, Doctor Who or whatever. And we would have to take some journey to like New Jersey to find like these eclectic science fiction fantasy bookshops where I could get some of these British right. Science fiction as well and fantasy. So, I mean, I drove my mother nuts.
Well, it worked out well. It was all for a good cause. So that I'm sure that she was glad.
Oh yeah, we live next door to. It's a small thing, but we live next door to Maxwell Grant, who used to write The Shadow, the old series.
Okay.
And
yeah.
He's also the one that he used to put little books in my hand every time we went to the post office. We met up with him. He was like, "You'll want to read this one." And he was always putting like little science fiction, fantasy, and of course the Shadow books in my hand. So, I mean, like I grew up on all that stuff very early.
That's great. That's cool that you had that guy for a neighbor and who was willing to support your habit. I guess.
Yes.
Clay, what about you?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Of course. I read fantasy and science fiction when I was a kid. I was primarily a comic book guy. Not that I didn't read books as well, but I mean, my introduction to sort of fantasy adventure was primarily through comic books and through comic strips like Prince Valiant and things like that. So I went into a lot of history as well. And then, of course, when I became a young teenager, I went the typical boys route and read Conan and
of course,
sword and sorcery stuff. But I had always wanted to write fantasy or some kind of something weird. I just wanted to write stuff that was weird or historical adventure. It wasn't actually till later I really wanted to write comics, but so it was always historically based because for some reason or other I always read as much history as I did fantasy adventure. But I think comics were the formative literature, if you can call them that, of my life. That and monster movies. So you throw in comic books and monster movies, and that's what formed me.
Okay, there you go. And then you throw in some history, and you got Vampire Empire. Well, we'll get to that. But anyway, yeah. So yes, that's a very interesting combination, especially for your formative years.
Yeah.
Now, were you both writers before you met each other and started working together, or did that kind of develop?
No, actually, we were both writing. I started writing when I was, oh my gosh, probably in high school. I was already trying to write things and get short stories and poetry and anything else that I could think of to get out there. And I worked at a newspaper, and turned out to be I was a journalist there for a while, running as a reporter, a cub reporter for the newspaper, the town newspaper. So to me, writing was very natural already, and I knew I wanted to write fiction. I just didn't quite know exactly the methods to go about it. Back in those days, I had just graduated college. I had an English degree. I was very excited to use it. So I was already trying to draft my story and get it out there. I already had like stuff in the works, and Clay did as well. And
yeah, I'd been a writer also from when I was a little kid. I used to write stories and make my own comic strips. I was big into talking animals. I love talking animals. Any kind of talking animal was my guy. And I did comic strips on my own, and then I wrote little stories. And when Susan and I met, I don't think either of us had published anything. I mean, except like newspaper, and I'd done some newspaper stuff too. But I was trying to break into comics at that point, and she had kind of thought about that, but she was more interested in writing novels and prose. So it just became sort of the main thing we talked about when we first met was writing. So it was, and we were both comic fans, so we talked about comics as well. But so it was a thing that kind of drew it. One of the things that drew us together.
Yeah, I was into comic books later than he was, but I still enjoyed them. And when we both found out that we liked the same comics and series and stuff, it became a talking point. And then when he says, "Oh, I'm trying to break into comics," my ears went up like, "Oh, really? Tell me more."
Yes. Now, and one of the things that I'm always fascinated by, and I've asked this question of a couple of other writing teams, is how that process works, and I want to get into that with you guys also. But I guess even before that, in this case, especially since you're married and all, what was the impetus for you deciding that you were going to do it together? Did you decide that early on, or did it just kind of happen? Or
it's kind of an emergency. Again, it comes back to comics. I had done a little bit of work for Marvel Comics at one time, and the editor I worked with moved to another company, and he called me one day and said, "Hey, we just got the license to do some Disney stuff. Would you be interested?" Because he knew I had done some kids comics and some humor comics. And I said, "Oh yeah, Disney, sure. I'll have like 10, 15 pitches on your desk by tomorrow. Don't worry about it." Yeah, I hung up the phone. I'm like, I don't know anything about Disney.
He didn't know a Disney movie at all, other than like the barest bones of the old days, like Snow White.
I knew Disney existed, and I had heard of him. But
well, that's a good start.
Yeah, and I've seen some old stuff, but these were the newer properties they had the rights to. So Susan, luckily, was living in my same home, and she's she's a Disney person. So I went up to her and I said, I just got off the phone with so and so, and he wants to do this, and I said, I need to give him some pitches by tomorrow, so let's put some pitches together. And we did, and we sold some of them, and we ended up writing the scripts together, and we decided this works out pretty well. And I don't, as of up to this point anyway, everything we've written since then has been together. Yeah. But it was because I basically committed myself to something that I couldn't do
without her. So yeah,
without me. Exactly.
I mean, I could have tried, but it wouldn't have been.
It would not have. It would not have been the same product.
He wouldn't have called me again.
He would have thought, "Oh, that guy's nice," but
yeah, exactly.
Now, what was the first book that you guys did write together? Was that the Banshee Screams? Is that what that was?
Oh gosh,
that's the first novel. Yeah, the first novel length thing we did. Yeah, we did that for Pinnacle Games, who who actually still is in business and still does the Deadlands role-playing game. They're still successful. This was for one of their spin-off games called Lost Colony, which was science fiction horror. We had done some short fiction for them based on the weird Western stuff. And then when they wanted to do novels based on their new game, they called us. And it was originally going to be a trilogy of 3 novels. And there was an economic downturn and some company issues. So it ended up being just crammed into one big book. And, but yeah, it was fun. I really enjoyed writing that book. I haven't looked at it in 10 years, but
yeah, it was a fun process.
I liked it.
And it worked fairly seamlessly for the two of us to work together. Before, we were just doing short stories. So we each wrote our own short stories, or we wrote our own scripts for the comic books, and then we would just like look over each other's stuff. So this was the first time that the two of us sat down and had to plan out a full novel. And that was the new process for us. So that was actually the early stages of how we work together now, was figuring that out in Banshee Screams, which worked really well because we really both loved the process, the product, and, we worked well together.
Well, that's a perfect segue into my next question, which is, how do you approach your team effort? How do you do that?
The main thing is to have everything as detailed as possible. So we'll sit down and we'll hash out our ideas and which way we want the stories to go and with the characters we want to focus on. And we basically try and draft out an outline, a chapter by chapter outline of the story, so we know exactly what's going on at any given time. So we can basically write together in real time. So I'll take like those first 3 chapters, and then he'll take the next 2 or 3 chapters. And then we usually used to cross over all the time. So I would give him my chapters and he would give me my chapters before we would go any further. So we would never get out of control in case I make some major change and kill Bob or whatever, or if the story, deviated from the chapter by chapter outline. We would always be in communication, luckily, because we're married.
That's a little easier. Yeah,
it does. We can chit chat over dinner or on a walk around the neighborhood or something, and hash out whatever new thing we might want to add or change. Because sometimes they can have a cascade effect on the story. So you really want to make sure that before you make a change, that it has to be a valid change and an organic change to, that's going to make the book a better story. So, but it was really about making sure those chapters are very detailed in what we need. And, things are always going to go awry, but that's normal.
That's in the best of all possible worlds, that it actually works out, that your detailed plan gets to the point you want it to get to. But it's always a struggle, and things change and things get better and characters die and some don't die that you thought were going to die. And so it's like every writing process, except there's 2 of us. So you have to go back and forth and back and forth. And it's good because we each had our strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. She was more of a character person. I was more of a world building person. And she would come in and say, it'd be good if Sally does so-and-so. And I'd say, well, that might work, but the problem is, the way we've established religion in this world is this, this, and this, and this. And so Sally shouldn't be able to do that. And if we really, really wanted Sally to do it, we had to go back and change the world.
Yeah.
So that everything was consistent. So you can imagine that leads to a lot of conversations and discussions and rewrites and changes. But it's okay. It ends up being better.
Yeah. We've rewritten and discussed these books and these chapters on like multiple walks. The whole neighborhood probably knows what we're writing at any given time, as do everybody in a coffee shop. So nowadays we're writing in seclusion, but back in the old days, it was like everybody could hear what we're talking about.
Yeah, and did you ever notice people, like if you're in a coffee shop or something and people scoot a little closer so they can try to hear what you're talking about?
No.
Or ran farther away because
Yeah.
we're talking about some really disturbing things.
Usually they were moving tables, farther because we're either talking really loud because we both want our point of view to get across, or we're discussing some horrible aspect of, how to handle a corpse or what happens if someone's head gets cut off and carried across town and that kind of thing. So
Yeah, that's when they're scooting away and they
yeah. That's okay.
Okay. Well, now my first introduction to your work was the Vampire Empire series.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when I first met the two of you.
Yeah.
Back on what the track that existed prior to urban fantasy, the dark fantasy track.
Yeah. Down in the basement of the Hyatt.
That's right.
Yes, down in the basement. And I'm going to show the cover of Riftwalker here so that people can see it. Oh, there we go. Okay. And which is a great book, but I also like it because it has a snippet of my review from Bitten by Books of the Greyfriar on it. And let's see, I'm in the dark here, but I'm going to say, it says, a vivid, startling, and horrifying depiction of a world where humans are no longer sit at the top of the food chain. A fresh, intriguing take on the vampire mythos.
You're an excellent reviewer.
Thank you.
I should mention also that beautiful cover is by Chris McGrath, who, of course, is legendary in the science fiction fantasy publishing world.
And we were very lucky to get him.
His Jim Butcher, the Dresden.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. No, it is a gorgeous book. I will say that. I couldn't find my copy of the Greyfriar. I think I lent it to my son, my youngest son. But in any case, but what I would like to do to begin our discussion a little bit of that series is, Clay, could you talk, kind of give us an idea what's the setup? What for people who maybe haven't read it? What's your sales pitch to get people really involved?
The setup is, well, if you ask me, you get one setup. If you ask her, you get another setup. I noticed this at conventions because she comes at it from a different point of view.
Okay, we'll do both.
My setup, is historical and is the world, because that's how the book came to me, was through the world. And the premise is, in the year 1870, vampires destroy the northern industrial world. They kill most of the people and destroy the capability of humans to make things in the north. And they settle around the northern hemisphere in their clans, and they keep humans as food, herds. The humans who survive this disaster, the Great Killing it's called, they move to the equator, to the tropics. Because in our world, vampires are not supernatural creatures. They are parasitic species that grew up, that evolved along with humans over the ages. And it's not unlike the mythological vampires who fear the sun, who can't go out in the sun. Ours aren't afraid of the sun, but they don't function in the heat. They can't. So they don't typically live around the equator. Those few who do come out only at night, hence they're nocturnal. So the humans move to the equator, the tropics, and they reestablish their human world. The military power of the North that they managed to escape with blends with the societies that already exist, of course, in the tropics. And 1870 is just the beginning of the major colonial period in the Industrial Revolution. So the book actually begins 100 years after that, in the year 2020, oddly enough.
That is interesting.
I used to post that on Facebook every now and then. There used to be an advertising tag, which was, "It's now 2020 and a bloody reckoning is coming." But this was written in 2009. So it's 2020 now, and their human societies have reestablished themselves, and they've got their feet under them, both socially, economically, militarily. and they are going to launch a war into the Northern Hemisphere to destroy the vampire clans and retake what they consider to be their birthright, their human territories.
But notice that he never once talked about the characters.
I don't.
And that is what I do at the conventions.
Yeah,
I'm talking about a Greyfriar and a Dela. That's the difference between our two pitches.
Okay, well, and you can speak a little bit. I've got some other questions I will ask you about them a bit later, but go ahead and give us your intro speech to those two.
No, to me it's always about the woman on the cusp, a young woman on the cusp of becoming empress, on the last ragtail group of humans around the equators, and she is on a diplomatic mission in some ways, and
right.
her and her brother's ship is attacked by vampires, and when it crashes, she is not rescued, but she is helped by the vampire fighter, the Greyfriar, and it's their struggle to get her across back to her people in safety, and it's their budding relationship, and and in the midst of a violent bloody struggle for the right of humanity. So to me, it's like I said, I come at it from a character point of view always, and that's the difference between our writing styles. Is I'll always look at it from the character's point of view first, and then drop it into a world. And Clay's always like, he's very focused on the world and kind of forgets about the characters sometimes. He's so focused. But that's a historian for you. That's why I married a historian.
There you go. That's a perfect. But I mean, the synergy there must be really good. Now, did I just use that like 90s term? But anyway, but I mean, that's a perfect melding of your two skills. So that's great. And can maybe Clay, you would maybe be the one to ask about this, the idea of the geomancy that takes place in the series. Can you tell people a little bit about that?
Yeah, the geomancy is it's a legit term, but we sort of alter it a little bit. It ties in with a form of earth magic power in the earth, and there are people in our world who can harness this magic, track it and trail it through what are sometimes called ley lines. Some people do it through mechanisms. They do it through crystals. They do it through herbs. We tried to tie in sort of traditional forms of folkloric magic from around the world, and give a sort of a unified theory that what they're really doing is geomancy. All forms of magic that grew up in human history is really some form of geomancy. And then every now and then there are people, just as in traditional magic, who can perform these rites through some power within themselves, just like the highest form of magic is the ability to speak things into existence. Hence, God spoke the universe into existence. And Adela, the main character, unknowing at first, becomes trained as we go on in the books, is this person who can speak geomancy and the power of the earth. It's very difficult to control. Her power is so extreme that she can unleash it without necessarily the ability to manage it, which happens occasionally and with terrible consequences. But over the course of the book, she learns how to manage it, but even so, it has a terrible cost on her. Magic isn't free, and the power that she is handling does terrible things to her. So, but it's earth magic, and it impacts vampires specifically because vampires are so attuned to the natural world. They hear, they smell, they see on a level that humans can't. They're in touch with nature. So nature, if it can be harnessed, can be used as a weapon against them. And that's what she does.
Okay. Hopefully I think you both did a great job of explaining, and hopefully we'll get people who are unfamiliar with that series to want to check it out, because it is great.
Thank you.
Very, very exciting, and I think it's worth people hearing these details.
Thank
Now,
you.
the next one.
And you got to remember, it's a big adventure story. We've got the history, and we've got the empires, and we've got the magic. It's basically, Zorro and vampires and swords and guns and running and shooting and
That's the short pitch, right? But that's also very accurate.
Zorro meets Dracula.
Wasn't it the Scarlet Pimpernel?
Yeah,
it was the Scarlet Pimpernel.
The Scarlet Pimpernel meets Dracula.
Yep.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Either of those work just fine.
Yeah, okay.
And next we have
Oh yeah.
Key series, and this is book 2, which is I have ebook copies of the other 2, but this is the print version of this one. So anyway, that one is also a lot of fun. And Susan, what can you tell us about the Crown and Key series to give the overview for folks who may not have read it yet?
Sure. The easiest tagline is Charlotte Bronte's Avengers. Basically, it's superheroes in the pre-Victorian world. We got a magician. We've got a steampunk engineer. We've got a werewolf hunter. We've got all these different mix of magics and capabilities. And this group comes together to fight this rising evil that's sweeping through London. And it's their story, their origin story, basically, and all the dynamics that both good and bad that come through with this group forming and fighting this evil that nobody really knew except as history and as lore, and that suddenly it's made manifest. And we had a lot of fun with writing that. And it's a great story. We really enjoyed writing.
And not vampires in this one.
No, werewolves.
Werewolves. So yes, we got.
And the other things, we specifically kept vampires out.
Yeah.
I mean, they're in the world. We never mentioned them, and we've done vampires, but we got werewolves, we got homunculi. There's zombies. There's you name it, it's in there.
Yeah, and the different zombies are. They're interesting. They really are. Now, can one of you describe a bit about the ether, if that's how you pronounce it?
Yeah. Yeah. The ether was something we had to come up with. This was a project that came to us through Del Rey. They had the bones of it themselves. We didn't create. Okay. They called us the editor there had read Greyfriar, and they had this project, which was an early version of Crown and Key, and they called us and said, "Hey, would you like to write these books?" And we said, "Yes, we would." And we kind of redid the world and kind of yeah, sure. And we played around with their world a little bit, and they had magic, but they didn't really have rules. They didn't, magic was just, they did magic. And so we had to come up with something. So we came up with this idea that there is a form of matter, like gravity or electricity or whatever, that powers magic, and it's called ether, and it comes, it's not, I'm sure it's been done on some level somewhere, and it comes from another dimension, and people who do magic are able to draw it from that dimension, channel it through their bodies or through their crystals or their wand or whatever, their hat, whatever they use. And it's a unified, just like geomancy was sort of a unified theory for Vampire Empire, this became our unified power source that could be manifested in a lot of different ways. You could use it to control the weather. You could use it to, pull rabbits out of hats. You could use it to raise the dead. but it's still fundamentally the same form of power, just used by different people in different ways because they learned different disciplines to manage it.
Or my favorite way, use it to power your tattoos.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. You gotta be able to do something for that, yeah. Or clean house, right? But he mentioned Snow White earlier, so yeah. Get something magical to clean your house, yes. Oh, what would you say that of your protagonists from both of these series, who do you admire the most? I mean, if they were an actual person, I suppose, and I imagine in your head that they are, but which of them are to you the ones you most admire? And Susan, we'll start with you.
The easy, of course, is always Greyfriar to me, but in truth, it would be Anhalt, who was the father figure, who was the man who helped raise Adela, and always was her protector, always was the person who was looking out for her while her real father, ran the empire and was doing politics and manipulating so that she would get married to further the cause of the empire. It was Anhalt, Colonel Anhalt, who was always there by her side, making sure she learned the right things, grew up morally in as good a direction as he is. And to me, he was like the one father figure that was just, you always wanted to be, because he always was going to tell you the truth. He was always going to make sure that you were safe. He was going to always go to the extra length to make sure, he would give his life for you. And that kind of father figure to me was so powerful. So as much as I love Greyfriar and am in love with Greyfriar because he's just hunky, but the perfect foil for Adela, it still boils down to the love that Anhalt has for Adela and what lengths he went to secure both her and her brother Simon into making sure that they had what they needed, and both morally and physically and and magically to accomplish what they and survive what this world was going to throw at them. For crowning key, it's Malcolm and Penny.
Oh yeah.
The werewolf hunter and the engineer and the young werewolf that they adopt to some extent, that Malcolm basically becomes almost a father figure to as well. Here's a man who kills werewolves for a living, and he thought the worst of this child, thinking she's going to grow up and just eat people, so let's just get rid of her now. To the father figure he became for her as well. I'm a sucker for father figures. So that was really my favorite dynamics and favorite characters in those two books. What about you, sir? I stole Anhalt from him.
Anhalt's our guy. He's sort of like the moral core of that series. And so we both love him. Crowning Key, the lead character in Crowning Key, Simon. I think his name is Simon Archer.
Yes, that's Simon. Yeah.
Simon starts off as sort of the typical character that I tend to write, which is a guy who's sort of shiftless and aimless and wanders around and doesn't know what he wants to do with his life and is content to sort of fritter away great potential and go to bars every night with his pal, and that he would live his entire life that way. But he has responsibility and duty forced on him, and he accepts it and thrives under it, and manages to keep a group together of disparate people who are not necessarily should be together, but through good humor. Basically, he's a humorous man, and he sees a lightness in the world, which even in its darkest moments, he can be funny and he can lighten the burden of the people around him and sort of accept a little bit of that burden on him. And it's the kind of person you want to be. You always get to write. You shouldn't write people that you are. You should write people that you want to be for your hero. And Simon is the person that I want to be. Unfortunately, the first 2 or 3 chapters is the Simon that I am. By the end of the trilogy, he's the Simon that I wish I could be.
Well, and I think, your point to how he kind of looks out and manages to somehow keep a lightness about him.
Mm-hmm.
And he's always got that hope. I think he is kind of the heart of the whole little operation. That he's the one that I think saw the need to draw everybody together. So that makes sense.
It's tricky to do that too with a character that is humorous, because if they're too humorous in drastic situations, then it becomes a farce. And if that's what you're going for, that's fine. But that wasn't what we were going for. So hopefully, and Susan has to, as the writer, she has to kind of rein me in, because I have a tendency to just write shtick, to write people just saying, like I write my people quip, and she'll say, this is one quip too many, and it diminishes the fact that their lives are in danger, because they need to be running here rather than joking. So
there's a balance to humor in action and adventure, and
sure. And
it's mainly to release tension. It's to release that little valve that's getting too tight, it's about to explode. You've got to let that out a little bit. And so humor is a great thing. We try and use humor in all our stories. And Clay is the funny man. I'm the straight man always to the comedy team. But you always gotta, rein in some of that humor, because as funny as it is, and there are some great lines that we threw away because they just didn't fit the moment. And if we could have used them elsewhere, we probably could have, or we might have done it too. But there's always a time and a place for the right joke at the right time. And so it's always good. I love the humor in it. I think Simon is, he's perfect because of that, because he has that ability to keep, like Clay says, to keep the darkness at bay when the darkness is just bearing down on these people and you have no idea how they're going to accomplish or escape any of this. He can lighten the mood just a little bit and make sure that, everybody has what they need in order to accomplish what they have to do. And if that means quip a joke and lighten the mood, that's what he's going to do. And, I love Simon for that as well. I mean, that's why I married Clay, because, he makes me laugh. And when on the darkest of my days, he's always there to be there, but he'll always be there to remind me why I should be smiling occasionally as well. So those kind of things are always in play in our books. And again, it's all about character dynamics, and, so I don't mean to silence his good humor, but it's sometimes you have to.
Sometimes you have to tamper it just a bit, right?
Yeah.
Not silencing, just kind of tampering it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you were to compare Adela and Kate, and then Simon and Greyfriar, how would you say that those two characters are most alike, and how are they most different? What's the biggest difference between them and the similarity?
It's a great question, actually. I don't think anybody has ever asked us that one. That's a great question.
Well, with Greyfriar and Simon, first of all, Greyfriar, at least at the beginning, is relatively humorless. He's a very driven, he's straight arrow type guy. He only becomes even lightly humorous later, and usually it's unintentional. Greyfriar is not someone, I think, although he manages this weird network of people, it's not like a group. He's a lone wolf.
Right. Yeah.
Simon is not. Simon thrives on society. Even when he doesn't want to run a superhero group, he wants to be with people. Greyfriar wants to help people, but then go back to his castle and hang out with cats.
Yeah.
So they're very different people. Greyfriar's, in fact, it was difficult sometimes writing Vampire Empire because he's not funny, and I wanted him to say funny things, and it wasn't appropriate for him.
Right, it wouldn't have fit. Yeah.
Until later, by the third book, they have a relationship and they're kind of a thing, but in that first book, they're not. They're running for their lives, and I always wanted them to say, "Oh, this would be a good place for a little." No, it's not a good place for a line. They're running for their lives, and they don't know each other well enough to quip. This isn't Nick and Nora Charles, so
Right.
But I don't know about Adela.
Okay, Susan, what you want to take the ladies then?
Sure, I will take the ladies. It's interesting because both of them are women who are family oriented. Adela has her family, whether it be her father, the Emperor Simon, Anne Holt. That's her niche with the family, and so is Kate. Kate's father is missing, and she's got her sister who's running amok and doing all these things she doesn't want her to do, and she's become this parental guidance, and they're both kind of searching for that. But in terms of everything else, Adela is still much younger than Kate was, and so she was learning. Adela was always learning more, and always a little bit not uncertain, but just slightly on a path that she wasn't quite sure of. Kate always seemed to know what she wanted and how she was going to do it. I think Simon even was surprised because she's a force of nature. And Kate was one that was like, she knew what she wanted to do. She knew what she had to do. And it's not that, I think in some sense, I think she kind of helped form Simon and got him out of the bar and got him thinking that there is a path that has to be walked. While Adela, I think, knew a path that she was on, she was still kind of uncertain about it. Her teacher, her mentor, Mamoru, who was teaching her all about the geomancy, she felt like it was kind of a not a lark, but she really didn't think it was something that was important in the same kind of sense that Mamoru did. And half the empire didn't believe in this kind of magic anyway. They just wanted her to marry and form a good relationship with the neighboring Americas. And unfortunately, she was marrying Trump, which God forbid. If we
that was
Thank God Clark saved her.
Senator Clark.
Adela, I think, was learning how to be in control. Kate was in control and had to learn how to compromise.
Yeah.
So I think that they were sort of meeting in the middle, but they were coming at it from completely opposite points of view.
Yeah, and their circumstances were certainly different as well. So I'm sure that that would play into it if you're somebody who's being groomed to be an empress.
Yes.
So that's going to make your point of view a little different, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, she had to conform a lot more,
right?
Because of politics and being an empress. Eventually she becomes empress, and everything changes for her. Where she was younger, she was freer to go about and do things, and then suddenly, no, she has to think about what's best for the empire and what's best for the war. And she underwent a huge transformation. I don't think Kate did, except in the sense that her sister, what happened to her sister, that changed her. But I think for Adela, she had a longer and wider arc in terms of where she started as a young girl to the woman and the empress that she became.
And she does always question, am I doing this because it's something I want, or what's the best thing for the empire? So she does, she starts asking those questions. So,
and they're hard questions to ask at a person at her age, and that's
a
lot of weight on somebody's shoulders.
And also as a woman surrounded by men, And attempting to run a war surrounded by military men, it's even more difficult to have your voice heard.
Yeah.
Right.
Which was one of my favorite parts of the story, was a woman who becomes empress and goes to war in a field of people who doubted her, who believed that she should have just been married off to somebody else, and yet, she makes a decision. Yeah, that's not really what we need to be doing here. And granted, Greyfriar helped in that decision, but still, I think she would have. I think even in her own mind, I think she would have it's time for me to make my own decisions, and I know what's best to win this war and how I'm going to win it. So that element to her was always a pleasure, and I don't think Kate ever got to that point in her story where, except in regards to her sister and keeping that family together with Simon.
Yeah, and in some ways, I think that in Kate's case, that the stakes were different too, in terms of not really knowing what to expect. And I think Adela had a better idea of, this is what'll happen if.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the Crown and Key series, they're dealing with this, all kinds of craziness. It's like, who's coming out of the woodwork next?
Yeah, stuff just jumping out of the shadows at you. Whereas, Adela had a war, and she had a map, and she knew she had to take territory, and it was just, how are you going to take territory?
Yeah, and she knew her enemy, where I don't think Simon and Kate really knew everything that their enemies could do, and so they were constantly, reevaluating and trying to figure out the next step. Where Adela goes, well, I know how to kill vampires, and I know what I need to do it, but what's the cost of it? And that's the difference between them.
Right. Now you both answered this in terms of Vampire Empire. You both love Anhalt. Who was your in the Shadow? Shadow Revolution was the name of the first book. In the Crown and Key series, who was your favorite secondary character to write? Who did you enjoy your time on the page with the most?
Well, both of our favorite secondary characters was Nick.
Oh, Susan's definitely shaking her head.
Yeah, Nick is probably the only character we have in any book we've ever written that I love. I could have written books about him, and Susan hates. She would have written.
That's interesting.
She would have cut him out if she could have. I think the best scene I ever wrote is a Nick scene. I can't remember what book it's in, but it's in one of the 3 books, but probably the 3rd one. I loved him, and I loved him and Simon together. He's Simon's pub pal.
It's a good way to put it, yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of his mentor, but, when you're basically just drinking every day, you really, mentoring kind of takes a back seat. But I loved him. I thought he was funny and tragic, and
he was tragic,
interesting, but we don't all share that point of view.
Okay, well, Susan, who was yours?
Let me see. Probably a secondary is I like the oh my God, I can't remember her name. Kate's sister. Why am I blanking on her name? Imogen. Thank you. I liked Imogen, and I liked her relationship with what was the werewolf girl? Charlotte. Oh my God, my brain just blanked.
We didn't really write these books.
Well, it has been a while, so yeah.
Charlotte and Imogen were my 2 favorites to play, and I didn't think that was ever going to happen. I thought I was going to focus more on Malcolm and Penny and Simon and Kate, but I wound up really feeling for their story, because Imogen undergoes an incredible transformation. And to me, it was in the dark period of my life where I was losing both my parents, and that transformation she went through was a gut-wrenching one that you just don't expect. And I felt kind of that kinship with her because I was transforming into somebody else as well. And it was Charlotte who continually was there for her to try and refocus her attention. Like, you are human. You are still human. Don't think of yourself as a monster. I'm not a monster. Even though I'm a werewolf, I'm not a monster. And it was that relationship between those two girls that I really wound up falling in love with, and which was really just going to be like a secondary throwaway thing in the story, but became much more impactful. Not just because of what I was going through, but because the two characters evolved into something much more special. And I really enjoyed writing the two of them and their side stories because they were so similar in what they were dealing with in some ways and how they were going to survive through this, both mentally and physically, because they underwent, tremendous things. Well, Charlotte basically left the pack and came to the side that was hunting them to try and stay alive, and for her to help Imogen as she went through this horrible transformation into homunculi was very powerful for me. And
I think that the relationship between them helped humanize them both.
Absolutely.
As a reader, it does. I mean, I really think that that made a significant difference there. Mm-hmm. Now, if you could have one of your characters, one of these characters from either of these series that could go visit another series, make a guest appearance, who would you send where? Mm-hmm. Clay, what about you? Can you think of one? He's thinking too. Whichever one of you thinks first.
These are questions I've never usually when you do an interview, you get the questions you've heard a million times. And now I'm hearing questions I haven't heard before.
Carol's throwing curveballs at us, which I love.
That's like 60 minutes. I feel like I should be smoking and sweating.
I'm sorry.
That was me.
You go, guys. I have to think. I don't know. Wow.
I know, it's a tough one.
Simon somewhere, Clay. What other series could he go visit? And
wow.
Simon could go. Simon, I think, could fall into the Vampire Empire series, only because he also works with the magic, because it's ether, and again, ether is still nature. So I think his magic could still, could work, and maybe Adela and him would find some common ground on the geomancy thing. That's why that kind of magic is still relevant, and his magic could be just as powerful against vampires. Like I said, there are vampires, and I'm sure it would have been in Crown Key, and I'm sure that if we had decided to bring them in, that he would have been just as effectual at that.
But from other people's series, Simon's a good, he's a good plug and play. He could go into like the who did the Parasol Protectorate series?
Oh, Gail
Carriger.
Yeah, he could fit into there. He's got that kind of.
He's suave.
Yeah, he could suave and he'd hang out.
That's an idea. Yeah, I could see that actually. So yeah.
Drink and hang out with ladies.
Are you saying in terms of our books or in terms of any
other
series?
I think.
Any series.
Oh, yeah. Any series.
That's why I couldn't think.
All right, that's where I missed that. All right. Oh, that's interesting.
I got one. Sure. Okay, I got mine.
That's not fair.
Yeah. So, Susan, if you can, where would you send Greyfriar?
Oh, Greyfriar. He could send right to my boudoir. No, that's
well, I think your husband may have something to say about that.
No, he's up there.
Fine.
Well, now,
I would love to see. Oh my goodness, he would be awesome in. Dun dun dun. Why am I blanking?
He could go into like the Sharp series, but but they don't have vampires.
That's what I would say.
He could be the only vampire
into the Sharp series. Okay.
Oh my God, yes. Well, actually, he was. He that's where he was born for me. I decked him out in the same outfit that I put Sean Bean had in the Sharp series. So, but
Okay.
so to a certain extent, I know why he said that, and thank you for reminding me. But yeah, it's that kind of world. I think he would have made a fabulous. Hello, Marlo, the cat's here. He would have made a fabulous addition to Sharpe's regiment. Him and Harper going off against the French and having Greyfriar on their side. Yeah, I would write that story.
Okay. Now, do either of you have a favorite installment? Like, which of the 3 books out of either of those series did you have one that you preferred over another?
Sorry, Cat.
I think Greyfriar is head and shoulders because it serves as a book. I mean, The Crown and King
It's an introduction
standalone too, but it sold originally as a standalone book, and then later they bought 2 more, 3 more eventually. But Greyfriar, I'm really, really proud of Greyfriar. I'm proud of all of them, but Greyfriar, it's also the first one we did for the series. Yeah. I'm immensely proud of Greyfriar. So,
as you should be. Susan, what about you?
I still love the final book in the Crown and Key series, where it all comes down into that final fight. I still love that final fight in that book, and I also love the Geomancer book where they go to Tibet and find that monastery of vampires that had been sequestered away, and they find so many, that Greyfriar finds his people to some extent, where before he's with all the people in London, all the vampires in London who are all these horrible, decadent, people, that he winds up finding in Tibet, people who are like him, who are open to so many things, to, oh, sorry, cat.
It's okay. It would not be a virtual panel without the addition of a cat or dog.
That's true.
It's getting close to feeding time. He's
okay. I'm sorry.
No, but it's that kind of that ability for him to connect still resonates with me, and because he's such an outsider, he's such a loner, even with his own people, he's an outsider, and that he had Adela, and Adela was his world but it was a human world, and he really was never at home in that world, but he found his home in Tibet, and that family that he found there still resonates with me. That he had, that he sort of had to let that go and go back. Not that he was sad; he was happy to go back with Adela, but that he lost that connection for a time. And I would love to keep writing in that and get back to that story, because there's so much going on there that I love. But
there you go. Talk about at least maybe a short story will show up.
Yeah.
Now we're going to switch gears a bit,
and
we're going to talk about your.
Okay.
See, there we go.
Yeah.
I'm like, the camera's up there, Carol. What are you doing? Got your Flash and Arrow tie-in novels, and I have enjoyed those. And what struck me about doing tie-in work in general is that it must be kind of difficult to take somebody else's characters, and I'm guessing that they give you like a basic synopsis of the kind of story they want. Is that how that works? Oh, they don't. You come up with your own. Okay, but you're still using these characters that are pretty solidified in people's minds, and yet you have to make them also your own, and that had to have been a little bit of a challenge. Could you talk a little bit about that experience? I mean, I will admit that when I'm reading them, I would picture the characters from the shows in my mind, because that's my experice with them.
Yeah, you're supposed to.
When I was a kid, I read both of those comics some.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a long time ago that I was a kid. So my more recent exposure is with the shows, and I know those are what they're supposed to be tied into anyway.
Right.
So anyway, back to my question. What were some of the? Well, I mean, I'm sure it was very gratifying, but it was also probably a challenge trying to do that.
Well, the good thing was that we were both fans of the show, so that helped immensely. When we were approached, we were actually given a couple of different properties to work with, and we chose the Arrow and Flash series because Clay was a big Flash fan and I was a big Arrow fan. So it seemed like the perfect marriage in some ways to work on these two books together. For me, I was always doing, I love media tie-ins. I read them all the time. I read Star Trek. I read all those. And to me, it was the ability to play in a universe that's already created for you. And all I've got to focus on is character was like my bread and butter. I was in heaven because the world's already built. I don't have to do the world building. I don't have to argue with Clay about why I want this section in the world to be the way it is. It's already there. All I have to do is focus on character, which is where I play most of the time anyway. So to me, it was, again, the hardest part was coming up with the story, and we had to come up with like 3 pitches of three different scenarios that we were going to, because they wanted a crossover event. So it was basically like the TV shows had the crossover events. This is what this was going to be. So it had to be a big enough story that would encompass both characters and all their ensembles. So we had 3, and they chose the one, and that's the one we went with. But to me, it was a fun experience because I loved playing with characters that I enjoyed watching and could bring to life and delve into those emotional things that you only get a snippet of on the TV show, but suddenly I could do pages worth of angst and drama, relationship stuff. So I was in heaven.
And I grew up, like I said, wanting to write comics, and we did do some comics, and that's how comics work. Unless it's creator owned, like if Marvel were to call me tomorrow and say, "Hey, do you want to write Spider-Man?" Oh, Marvel, by the way, call me tomorrow. So you want me to write Spider-Man? Well, Spider-Man's established, so you just want to put a little bit of your spin and try and find some elements that maybe other writers haven't found. I was super thrilled with those books. We were really lucky. I'm sure you know Steve Saffel. He hired us to do those. I'm grateful to him forever for that, for the confidence in us. And it was just a lot of the reviews that came out were, like I said, it was like watching an episode of the show. Well, that's what it's supposed to be.
Right. Yeah.
And some of the reviews were going, hey, they should hire Clay and Susan to write for Flash and Arrow.
Again, CW, give you a call, right?
In case Greg Valenti is watching, Flash is still on, and we can write for the other ones too. But like Susan said, to be able to do a little bit more in depth with the characters and the villains, I loved the relationship between Barry and Joe. Yeah. So to be able to do scenes with those two, it was gratifying. I really had a lot of fun, and just to be able to write superheroes.
I thought he was going to say Gorilla Grodd.
Oh well,
I'm so sorry. I did not think the Joe one was coming in.
I did manage to slip Gorilla Grodd in there, but we couldn't make him our main villain, unfortunately. But,
that he was one of our big pitch stories. And
but
they said no because they had plans for him.
Yeah.
So they waved us off, and Clay was brokenhearted. But we did manage to slip him in for a brief.
Yeah, he made a very brief guest.
Yeah, like a dream sequence. But it was a blast. I really enjoyed doing those books.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that struck me actually just earlier today is that it was kind of cool seeing the juxtaposition too, which doesn't always show as much in the 2 series because they are off doing their own things, even when they do have crossover events. But in these books, you're taking these 2 people that you've got Barry, whose changes were actually foisted upon him by circumstance. He did not he managed to hang on to himself, but his was, from outside forces, whereas everything that Oliver went through, all of his changes were in, he did them himself, and sometimes consciously and sometimes not. And so I thought, well, that's a really interesting pairing to have, to get to focus on for these stories. So I've really enjoyed them as well. So
Thank you.
And I highly recommend them to anyone who has not, who may see this. And what kinds of things do you guys like to read for fun?
I have gotten to where I almost exclusively now read nonfiction. I read a lot of history, and it's almost all for research, for projects we're working on or thinking about working on. I read so much nonfiction. I'm reading now about the 30 Years War. So, and
just light reading.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. Yeah.
About the emperor. Anyway, I don't need to go into detail, but it's cool. But yeah, I've always read history. It's always been my thing, and I always was drawn to fiction that had historical elements to it, like
right.
sword and sorcery or fantasy. But gosh, I need to read a lot more fiction than I do, because the last couple of years is almost exclusively nonfiction.
Yes, I gave you that pile. You need to read.
I know.
He has a literal pile that you passed on.
I do. It's sitting in my office,
and it's still sitting there.
Yeah.
And I'm the opposite. I will read every chance, and I stepped away from it for a while too, because as you get busy, you tend to stop occasionally because you're so focused on your own stuff. And
right.
I realized that dearth was a hindrance to me, that it wasn't firing that creativity and that excitement that I would get when I was reading books. Because yes, you'll get it from your own stuff, but you were inspired. When I was a budding writer, I was inspired by everything else, by other people's works, and I found that was missing. So within the last year or two, I have been diving back into reading everything that I can possibly get my hands on, like the Alana Andrews books. I can't read enough of them. I love all their.
There are a lot of them. But yeah,
my God, there's so many, and they're all good. I don't know how they do it. I love Patricia Briggs. Her Alpha and Omega series is great. Rebecca Roanhorse. Her Trail of Tears book, her Trail of Lightning books series is a freaking amazing. I actually reread the first one again just recently, even though I read it not that long ago. But it's just a wonderful story of the Native Americans and the lore and everything else that goes along with it. There's so many out there. I've actually been reading some mystery and some romance and just, a little wide variety of stuff. But my heart is always in urban fantasy and is always in, straight fantasy. I've been reading the Witcher series. I've been reading, you name it, I've read it.
Yeah.
And I find myself getting refired again, and that's what we needed, or at least what I needed to rekindle everything that gets sapped out of you after everything that we've been through recently, and everything that this little bit of finding that flame again, that trace of a flame, is a good thing. And books are the best way of doing it. So I could read a ton. I'm going to be reading a ton more. My to be read pile is a mountain.
Well, there you go, as it should be, right? And yeah, we want the flame to be a good one. We don't want it to be like a conflagration. You want it to be. Well, for my last question for you guys, this has to do kind of with process as well. Mm-hmm. When you're writing, do you what are your habits? Do you like having any kind of music in the background, or do you prefer silence, or I know I've heard some people like they prefer it like if the television is on but it's turned way down so that there's some kind of background noise. What's your approach?
With me, we're very different, Clay and I. So we write we write separately most of the time. I'm much more of a visual person. I like having things all around me to inspire me, whether it's a picture, like when we were writing Vampire Empire, I had a picture of Sharp on the wall. I had a picture of, a bunch of different things that would inspire me to, different vampires, different outfits, different costumes. I was very much into being inspired by those kind of things. And when I write, I love a sunlit room. So I'm always looking for sun in the house, in a coffee shop. I'll stock a table just so it could be.
You got dry on the ones by the windows, huh?
Yeah. So there's little things like that. And when I'm writing, I actually like music. I don't like words. I will pick.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
I'll do soundtracks because that creates ambiance for me. And usually when I'm writing a particular scene, I'll choose my ambiance. So if I'm writing a fight scene, I'll choose all music that is more action oriented. And if I'm writing a love scene, I'll do something more romantic. If I'm writing just a very basic scene, I'll have some very basic lo-fi music going on. So it's a different soundtrack for whenever I write. I can write in silence, but sometimes I like that little bit of inspiration, that little bit of jumpstart that good soundtracks can really give you.
Okay.
I can't do music at all. No. Music distracts me, whether it's just instrumental or voice. I can't. Even if I'm in a public place and the music is too loud, I'm lost. I can't. It breaks my concentration all the time. I can have the TV going. Yeah, I football game or sports or an old movie. It can't be something I'm intensely interested in, but something I can ignore, like the news. Where am I going? Oh, sorry.
I don't know. You were off looking for that other. You were looking for ambiance.
Yeah. I used to like to write in public places like coffee shops because the low level noise, the drone in the background.
Right.
The problem comes if you get that one person whose voice kind of cuts through the drone and you can hear every word they say.
Right.
That's a problem. But in general, just a hum, a buzz of people talking is no problem. It's been a problem the last year because I can't go to a coffee shop. I can't leave the house.
And we have no sun in this house.
and so I've learned to write a little bit in the house. I also tend to write, or used to anyway, longhand, first draft on a legal pad. I've started now on a computer, which is completely new to me. Writing original drafts on a laptop, it's hard. I like a pen and marking through things, and but this has been a tough year to kind of get your creative feet under you because things are different. You're knocked out of your routine, and a lot of writers depend on routine, and so it's been hard.
Yeah, I can certainly understand how that would be the case, and hopefully things are getting better, so you'll be back into that groove, back into your routines that spark things for you, and we will certainly look forward to the next time we get to see you in person as well.
Yeah, I hope so. Knock wood, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Or whatever we have. I don't think this is actual real wood, but I'll knock on it anyway.
Yeah.
It's probably cursed or something. By doing that, I probably, damned us all. But anyway, I want to thank you both so much for taking the time to do this, to sit down with me and talk about your work, and it's been fun. It's always wonderful to work with you, and both of you I got to use on panels during Dragon Con in 2020, but they were, I think it was just once for both of you, and I thought, I'm gonna get Clay and Susan for this author interview series if I can. So I'm so glad that you agreed to do this. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And for anyone who watches, we want to thank you as well. And, we appreciate it. And just to let people know what's coming up, later this month, 2 weeks from tonight, we'll have the Supernatural Rewind for season 2. We'll be talking about all things season 2 on that panel at 7. And then next month, in addition to Supernatural Rewind for season 3, we will have our author interview will be Faith Hunter.
Oh,
So,
Good. I'll be joining.
okay, good. Please do come and check it out. We'll have a good time. And I do appreciate very much, again, that you guys were willing to do this. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of our viewers, whether you've been watching us live during the panel or whether you watch this later, we appreciate it. And so much, Clay and Susan. I wish you all the best, and fingers crossed that we are able to all get back out and get back into, whatever counts as normal routine for all of us. So,
yeah,
We will.
I agree.
I know there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We'll be there.
yes, it is. It's feeling a little better every day. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. It was fun you having us, and you asked incredibly in-depth questions, which we loved. Really set our brains to work. So thank you. It was fun.
You are quite welcome. I'm happy that you were willing to do it.
Yeah.
Much.
Thank you, Carol.